I'm so excited that we have Taye here with us today. The first question that we have is a very general. We're going to start general and then get more specific. So what are the top 5 things that you've done in your career that have made you successful?
Okay, for me, not to sound too rehearsed, but I always try to remain curious. And I know that sounds cliche, but I ask a lot of questions and that kind of like ties in together. But I always try to make sure I'm present in the moment as well. Because sometimes you get so busy and wrapped up in things that we forget to take the moment at its forefront. Like we kind of think too much about things in the future, and I like to stay here as much as possible. Another thing I like to do is I like to cross collaborate a lot with my colleagues, even people who are not so technical. So it's not just me working with engineers or developers or data scientists. I kind of want to talk to people in marketing. I want to talk to people in operations as well. So I kind of think about like, what are they working on and what am I working on? How can we come together? And when you're in an organization, believe it or not, people are really like excited to hear about a techie help them be more efficient, especially from a data perspective.
Those are great. I need to write these down after we do this and start implementing those. So going on with some more general questions, what are you doing differently to manage your team during quarantine than you would be doing if you were in an office setting?
Honestly, like I'm touching base a lot more. I feel like it's easier when you're in an office because you can just like walk up to people. And now it's like everyone is on their laptops or any device. So they're kind of like, okay, I'm clocked in. Let me just work straight, till lunchtime, whether that's 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock. And no one is really talking as much as we did when we were in the office. So I'm actually doing a lot of touch base with like my colleagues, particularly a data coordinator, and making sure he's good. And like, hey, where are you at? Can I get a status update? I feel like I have to do a lot more outreach than I used to before. So I'm just kind of keeping the communication open. And then also doing a lot more as far as like weekly check-ins via email to be like, hey, this is the updates for this week. These are the things that we need to be mindful of. Any fires that we need to put out, just so everyone is clear. So if I forgot someone, they know the same information that I relate to him or someone else.
Mm-hmm. That sounds like a great plan. Is there anything that you're doing differently in your individual work? Being in quarantine? How are you managing that?
I'm taking a lot more notes because I feel like I have so many questions that come up, like just random client requests. And I think everyone can resonate with that, where it's like, okay, so can you tell me where we're at in this? And I'm just like, what? I don't even remember what I was thinking about 2 minutes ago. So it's just these random, like, IM messages, whether it's Slack or Zoom or Skype. It's like so much constant reaching out of me switching screens. So I'm just like, what was I even thinking about? What was I writing? What report was I looking at? So I had to be very mindful to actually block off time on my calendar to where I'm just like, hey, unless it's an emergency, like I have to turn my notifications off because I can kind of get steered in so many different directions.
Yeah, that's good to know I'm not alone in that. So if you are trying to plan out your day and you have time blocked for that, how are you managing the additional requests that's coming in? Because I know I'm struggling with that. I can have my day blocked off saying accomplishing task A, task B, and then you have 7 other tasks that you didn't expect come in. How are you managing that while working from home and kind of being more in charge of your own time?
I actually have to have like, it sounds so like old school, but like a to-do list because I need to know the dates of when something is a priority. So I need to know, okay, this report needs to be sent out by this date to reach this client, or it needs to like pass hands between me and another colleague so they can do what they need to do. I try to get that off my plate early in the morning because I know like it seems like after lunchtime for me, those when I get the random requests. It's like people go eat and then they're just like, hey, I was thinking about. So I try to have my mornings, like my early mornings, be dedicated to like work time, which are on my to-do list. And then I know the ad hoc stuff is coming around like 1, 2 o'clock usually.
Yeah, that's all good points. So how do you keep your team focused and in alignment during implementation?
Okay, now this is where the nitty gritty comes in because I feel like when it comes to, we need to know first what the system's requirements are, like with any data initiative. And I just know that from my experience with so many different systems. A lot of times, most of the arguments happen in the beginning stage of like, what should this be?
Mm-hmm.
And everyone seems to have an opinion. So once you kind of lock that down, like, hey, this is what we want our fields to be called, these are what our KPIs are, like, meaning every team who's involved needs to sit down and talk about these things. That's when you'll realize that most of it is not that complicated to develop or to push. It's mostly
Mm-hmm.
the beginning stage of like everyone going back and forth in terms of communication. So the way I do it is I make sure that we all are in the room at the beginning. No team is left out at the beginning stage, because I feel like that's when the hiccups happen.
Mm-hmm.
So we want to all agree before we move forward to the next step. This is what we agreed upon. So everything has to circle back to the original foundation conversation we had, where we already discussed this. So if everyone ever in doubt, they can always go back to and be like, oh yeah, we did talk about this at that meeting. And here are the notes.
Mm-hmm.
This is what we said. This is what this person on that team said. These are deliverables. Did anything change? Those are the types of way I kind of like steer everyone in a successful way, because I'm very organized. So I write everything down.
Mm-hmm. And in your explanation of that, it seems like you're acting as the project lead. Is that true? Or do you have someone like a project
I
manager or
usually
something?
am. I usually am.
So besides constant communication and having a stellar project lead, which is probably you in most scenarios, do you have any other frameworks or processes that you use to ensure a successful data migration or a successful project?
Yeah, okay. Now this is a little bit more towards like the middle end of it, because I notice sometimes when you try to change something, people don't like change
Mm-hmm.
sometimes. So I try to see, kind of, we have like when we're in beta testing, we kind of see how people are going to respond. So that's when I ask like usually people on staff to like, hey, if we implement this change, hypothetically speaking, can you like interact with it? So we kind of use like different user profiles and be like, okay, marketing right now is in beta testing for us. Can we see how they're interacting with it? Because we want to make sure it's successful. So whatever we had originally decided on, if it's not working internally, then 9 times out of 10, if we were to implement this for the entire org, it's probably going to fall through the cracks. And it could be anything simple from like a feature, or we change how like a page layout looks. Something so small like that, we actually do want to monitor. So those are the things I always think about. Like, let me just keep it internal, test it out first before we agree to do like a mass change.
That's very smart. And in terms of data governance, do you think that the business or IT or some other role should lead that? Who do you think hands that should fall in?
I was thinking about this question a lot because I feel like I'm kind of biased because I'm both, as far as like my business background and then of course tech. So I honestly feel like it should be a business function. And the reason why I say that is because data is not like historically a IT function, because it's not our data. We don't own it. So whether it's coming from a consumer or internal staff, they're the ones actually using the systems and creating those data points for us. And I'm thinking from a business standpoint, that's who should know their clients and their customers, and of course, internal staff. They know how they interact with the systems. They know which data is relevant for each team. And of course, like a director or a manager would know that. Like, hey, if I work in sales, this is the sales process. So this is how a sales manager would interact with your database. Me as a tech person, I wouldn't know that because I don't work in sales.
Mm-hmm.
So it seemed like a very simple question. I had to break it down. Like, actually, it should be a business function, and looping everyone who potentially is on the management level so that they understand, like, okay, we can do the tech side, but we kind of need to know what you guys are doing and what's your workflow look like.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. So in motivating people to be data stewards for data governance activities, I know that personally, sometimes I struggle with getting people to engage with us. It always seems to fall to the bottom priority. How do you prevent this? Because having data definitions, data stewards, and really improving the data governance is so important. So how do you ensure that it's top priority for everyone involved?
Okay, one thing that I had to do, because I, of course, worked in data governance as a data steward,
Mm-hmm.
is I had to know what I was doing, which to me seemed so small, was important to the overall success of whatever project it was. If I felt like my day-to-day was just like, oh, I'm just clicking away and cleaning Excel files, or I'm just exporting stuff and I don't know what I'm doing, I was more disconnected. But when I was looped into bigger conversations, that's when I was able to tie it back into why this was a need for me to do for any given day. So it was more or less just communication. And for me, luckily it came for our director, who was
Mm-hmm.
very like candid and saying like, hey, I know this might be a little boring work right now, but it's actually having major impact on said team or said project. So by him doing that, it helped me and my colleagues be like, oh, well, actually we do feel a little more valuable at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that you can set up a successful data governance without the support of leadership?
No, that's an honest question, because I feel like it can, you already kind of mentioned it, it can fall on the back burner, which is what you don't want. I feel like when you have buy-in from particularly executives, they're like, okay, we really need this. And they kind of are like our cheerleaders, because if it's not something that's making money, unfortunately, people look at it like, oh, we don't need it, without understanding that we're trying to just make things more efficient for everyone, not just one team or one department.
Very, very good point. You're making a lot of good points here. I need to implement this in my work. So what about when a lot of people from the business are asking you the more the questions relating to the data definitions? How do you kind of get the business to understand that you can't possibly be a subject matter expert in every single field, that it kind of falls on them? How do you differentiate where that onus should be, whether it's on the technical side or on the business side?
Okay. Now this one, it really depends on the team, whether it's like a team lead, tech lead, or director who's just not technical. A lot of times people don't understand that the information that they have is valuable for other people.
Mm-hmm.
There seems to be like I work on my team, I know what my team is doing, but I don't really know what they do over there. And it's a normal thing. It's nothing personal. I don't take it personally as a technical person. But I had to kind of have that conversation with non-technical people and be like, hey, although I don't work in sales, or I don't work in HR, I don't work in operations, a lot of what you do day to day affects what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of had to be a connector and have them understand like, hey, if you make sure that you're organized, or you store your data in a certain way, or input your data in a certain way, that subsequently helps me so that I don't have to come here and bother you or try to find you to get something done or approved. And when they see it in that like lens, they're like, oh, well, I didn't know that what I was doing was affecting someone completely over there. It is more just like a gap in communication, in terms of like people just putting their head down and working and doing what they need to do each day.
Mm-hmm. Implementing that one too. So switching gears a little bit here, do you think that data governance should extend to checking for bias? Should there be those checks for bias around the analysis and modeling process? Should that be included under governance, under the umbrella of governance?
I think we should, if we're thinking about like collectively as an industry, because the way we store data, the way we collect it, it's just very odd sometimes, because it's just like, depending on who you are, your title, your role, your team, you'll see data in different steps. And sometimes it might not be appropriate, or it might not be correct data, it might not be real-time data. So that's one thing that I always am mindful of. Like, the data that I'm seeing, is it actually really relevant for me to see it? Who is the one who actually got to see it? I think about those types of things. So data is a lot. I think everything we do is a data point, unfortunately, which is kind of creepy, but it's
Definitely
something
creepy.
that I definitely can see as being, oh, I'm sorry, can you see my face?
Yes.
Okay, good. I just want to make sure I'm freezing. But what I was saying is, I understand that we have so much information, so many different data points. So it's just, I want to make sure that at some point organizations.
Bit of Wi-Fi issues there, but we're back up and running. So my question was, if you're buying data from an external company, then where does the ownership of data governance fall if it's not necessarily your data?
Unfortunately, yeah, when you purchase data, it becomes yours. And I hate to bust people's like bubble of like, oh, they sold my data. I'm just like, yeah, because like I know we don't read terms and conditions. We should. Because unfortunately, it does say that when we create like user profiles or in a lot of social media applications, it does say that some of your information will either be sold or monitored as far as like analytics. So yeah, it definitely falls into the company who purchased the data.
It's a very good point. And that leads us into our next topic, which is the GDPR, the future personal privacy.
Mm-hmm.
So has the GDPR impacted the way you work or the way that you do business within the US?
It actually has, as far as like just providing all types of written communication. Like we always have to say, hey, where our data is being stored, who got to see it internally. That's like the biggest chunk of it, is like who got to see the sensitive data. Like certain roles, depending on their tier, their title, couldn't see data at certain points, which is acceptable in my world. But to other people, they just don't understand, like, why can't I have access to this like I used to? And I'm just like, she wasn't really supposed to see it. It wasn't appropriate, because sometimes it is very sensitive stuff. And just to give a little bit of context as an example, for me in my role, like I can see how much companies are going to make within a 6-month time frame, or how much money they're going to lose. Depending on your role, you're not supposed to know stuff like that. Like that's not, you don't want everyone to know your secrets, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So if you know that something's going to be outsourced, if you know someone's going to be laid off, certain people shouldn't know that, because you don't know what they're going to do with that information as far as like the digital world. So for me, I'm a little bit more like relaxed about it, but I understand that data is very sensitive and I take it very seriously.
And do you, at your current role, do you deal with companies, with clients outside of the US? Is that why the GDPR has had an impact on you, or just because you're seeing the different social ramifications that improper use of data is having, that you guys are at the forefront?
Yeah, definitely the social aspect of it, because a lot of our clients are like large nonprofits, and they're always concerned about like, oh, should we see certain donations, or should we see certain pledges? Like they are very like mindful of like who has access to the information. They access those types of data questions, and it's like it's very relevant to what we do.
Mm-hmm. And the should word is huge in data ethics. So how do you personally decide what should and shouldn't be done? And once you make that decision internally, how do you communicate that with your employees or with management? Is that always well received?
Say one more time. I think I understand, but I feel like I'm about to give you a lot of stuff.
It was a loaded question, so a lot may make sense. But when you're
I know. That's why I was like, I'm going to break it down.
I'll let you break it down, and then if I have any further questions, I'll ask.
Okay. So now I'm biased because of my role. Like as a manager, I like to know as much information as possible. And I'm very much I'd rather have more information so I can like break it apart than not enough information.
Mm-hmm.
So when I start to think about like data collection and like actually implementing projects, I like to have all my eggs in one basket, and then like I'll give it to certain people. Like that's how I work. And I feel like sometimes it's not appropriate. People are a little bit more, I wouldn't say secretive towards their data, but they're like, why should you know this? It's kind of the vibe I get. And I'm just like, because I want to know. So it's just, I get it. Some people are a little bit more like privacy oriented internally. Whereas with me, I'm just like, oh, more the merrier. Like, I don't mind. And I'm speaking from a technical perspective. Everything I do, I feel like someone on someone's computer can like revoke my access. So that's how I think about like data, which is like you can either take data and manipulate it, or you can just store it, and it's just legacy. So I don't really have too much personal attachment to data like that, like other people, but people really do get like creeped out over their email and their first name, their last name, and their purchases and stuff like that. So that's what I think about.
So it seems like your company is definitely ahead of the game and using the GDPR to better how they're using data internally. Do you think that there will be ramifications in the near future for companies that aren't doing the same?
Yes. I feel like it'll be a lot more like fines of like, hey, you weren't supposed to do this. Or it's like, I feel like when it comes to data in terms of like how we collect it and store it, and it's like notifications that we give to users or consumers for that matter, it should be a lot more regulations. I feel like things are a little bit more lax because we just have so many gadgets nowadays. So I feel like things slip through the cracks, whether that was intentional or not. But the way you're able to like use like single sign-on, I feel like that has a little bit of chunks of like, I don't want you to have an API that links to my email that can also sign me into your application. Like, what are you doing with my username and my password that I know you can see? That happens to be linked to like other things that I use. And single sign-on is very like common in IT world, where it's like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna have all the applications have one thing, and I'm just like, are you sure you want to do that? One login, one access. From a data perspective, are you sure you want to do that? Because that whoever's on that other side of that screen, whoever they are, company, vendor, they can see everything that your user is using for that single sign-on. And I don't think companies think about that when they're purchasing stuff. And I'm just like, no, you have to think about your user and how they would think if you were in their shoes.
Do you think the future will lead to more protection for U.S. consumers using products, services, anything? Do you think that there's hope for us as consumers?
There's hope for us. I think, yes, if we have people who are clearly in very high positions who understand that data, like privacy and protection, is very important, because we just have so much information out there and so many different like apps and gadgets. It's like, this is how I feel. I feel like it's very desensitized. People don't understand that all your information is traceable. And I don't want to be Big Brother, but I just want people to understand my day job behind a screen. Like, I'm the one who gets to sit here and look at it, but you wouldn't want a person like me who didn't have good attention. Like, that's what I think about. Like, if I had access to all of this data sets and I wanted to do harm, it would be really easy. And I don't think companies think about that when they want like to do their data projects or initiatives. They just think like, oh, I just want something to work, or I want to continue to make money. I think it should be set in stone that you can't do certain things unless you check off this list. Like, I really feel it should be that way. It should be a little bit more like hard to get information, and it's not, which is sad that it's easy to get information about people, about users, and it shouldn't be like that, in my own personal opinion.
That brings up a great point, and there is a balance. How do we balance data for good versus people that have these bad intentions? We want to give access to the people that are doing using the data for good projects and advancing medicine and anything related to the environment. But how do we balance the risk involved in that, in having data readily accessible?
I feel like it should be, which we kind of sort of have that. I know, like open source and stuff like that, where we get to see like who's a user, who created it, who uploaded it onto the site, or who like revoked it, or forked it. So we get to see those types of things, especially like the coding world, but it should be more of a traceable aspect of it. Like, once it leaves my platform, like, I don't know what you guys are doing with it. That's what I think the little catch-all can happen of like, yeah, we can give you access, but I want to know where it's going after it leaves a platform. Like, it should be more like regulation around that aspect. Like, yeah, we can give you access, which is great for the good people, but for the ones who might do weird stuff, we might want to see where it's going. Or like, it has to be something implemented in code or within data where you can kind of think about those things. And I've never actually thought about this as a plan, so this is just me off the top of my head. So I'm thinking about how to monitor, like, going against the bad guys of the world, guys and girls of the world.
Well, because we need to go against them, because they're coming in the masses.
And all the hackers, like, everything is just weird now.
I know.
Lord.
In one of my class, getting my master's right now, and in my class on Monday night, we had a Zoom bomber in our class. So someone came into our class that wasn't a student. But if you want to learn about logistic regressions, we can help you, but did you really need to hack into our class?
Yeah, I've had like students hack into like the Wi-Fi of the school. I was just like, see, now nobody had Wi-Fi for the rest of the after school program. I was like, this is annoying.
We could talk about how annoying that is for days, but on to the next question here. So what do you think the future of personally identifiable data looks like? Do you think that consumers will have control over their own data, or will continue to operate in a way that corporate America has control over our own data?
Oh my God. Like, okay. I would like to believe that consumers could have access to their own data, but I don't know if people understand what they're looking at, like the extent of how much data is available to companies or to like the government or like the healthcare. Like, there's anything we ever did in our lifetime is digital at this point. Like every job we've ever had, every place we've ever moved, every like credit card, like, and not just us, also for our family. Like you can see everything they did. So I think honestly, it would be a lot more education around educating consumers over the various data points
Mm-hmm.
and how they're intertwined with one another. Because as it stands right now, people kind of get glimpses of their data, the extent of their data, through like immunization reports. Like you'll see like every shot you ever had when you were a baby, and like until you get that long sheet, you're just like, I had all this done in how many years? You probably wouldn't know that that's available to your doctor. But that's just one example. In the same way, when it comes to technology, like when you have IT, you take your laptop back, they see everything you've ever done on that laptop since you logged on from your user profile.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's the extent. So I think a user would not know what they're looking at. They'll just be like, what is all this stuff? So it has to be more of an education aspect of it for the world at large so that they understand like the various different data points if we were to own our own data.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that brings up a good point with the education aspect of it. So if people aren't data literate, if their jobs aren't, if they're not immersed in data every single day like you and I, how do they know what's possible with their data, the predictability of it, how they can use it for good, for bad? How do we educate the masses on the risks, but also the positives of their data being readily accessible?
Mm-hmm. It's more just educating people on the level of comfort,
Mm-hmm.
because you have some people who don't like to use different systems. And the reason why is because they don't want their data out there. So it's not that people don't know. Some people are just not comfortable with just having all their information in digital form, which is fine. So depending on their level of comfort, that's where you kind of meet people where they're at. So
Mm-hmm.
it's like, okay, if I know I use a bunch of different apps, right, for social media, there's a way, of course, to link all your social media applications in one platform. So you can track your own user engagement, how many posts, likes, shares, stuff like that. So it depends on where people are at and where they want to go with it. Because for me, I don't use a lot of social media. So I would be one of those people where it's like, I wouldn't want to know what my social media looks like because I don't get on it as often as I should. But if you're one of those people where it's like, okay, I have all this stuff that I collect, what can I do with it? There's applications that can literally set up like analysis on things that you do, but it just like
Mm-hmm.
does it at a faster rate, kind of like scans it. Like as an
Mm-hmm.
example, we wanted to track like how our website is performing. We would use Google Analytics. That's just one tool that people use. Where it's just like, okay, I just want to look at one dashboard. How many views did I get? How many visitors? Where did they come from? What was my conversion rate?
Mm-hmm.
There are already tools out there to help us. And I think people just need to know what those tools are. So for me, I always try to give like a toolkit list to people. So like, yeah, there's already something out there that's describing what you do. You don't need me to tell you. Like I can just show you where it's at and I will show you how to set it up. But Taye doesn't need to do this in her like own free time.
I get that. So I've learned so much from you in this short amount of
Oh.
time. Is there, and I'm sure our members are going to think the same, is there anything else that you want to tell our community? Anything else that you want to share?
I would say for me, don't be afraid to like get started on any potential projects that you might have or ideas. I think fear is what prevents a lot of people from getting started on their goals or projects. So that's something that I'm always against. Like, don't be fearful, because I've only got to where I'm at by not being afraid of stuff and not being afraid to fail. Because I've definitely made mistakes, but I'm fine. So it's okay.
You're definitely fine. Yeah, that's a great piece of advice and a great place to end. So thank you so much for your time, Taye. We really appreciate it. I'm excited to get this out to all of our members.
Thank you.
Thank you.